Broadcasting from New Braunfels, Texas, home of the historic Green Hall and the best river tubing in America. You're listening to PX1 Sports Radio, where we cover the hottest topics in the sports gaming world and the world of sports entertainment. Here's your host, Mike Peters.
Welcome back to a midweek episode of the podcast. Doing something special today. This comes about as we've had some conversations on Twitter between some sim guys and some competitive guys, and the devs have been in it a little bit, and have just brought up some interesting things that I've seen from the sim side, which I think is kind of maybe holding the community back from in some ways from getting the respect maybe they feel they want. And honestly, I think a lot of it just comes from misinformation and maybe a little ego. And I've been guilty of it myself. I've said that competitive players couldn't play if it was real football. And honestly, it's just dumb. It is. I mean, I've been enlightened over the last few weeks. I've started to kind of come around on some of the things with competitive as, I play MUT and see some things and I talk to some things. Honestly, NYKia going hardcore into the competitive scene this year and being right around the top 100 for most of the year and posting videos and, chatting with him a little bit on his experience has changed my view in a lot of ways, because he's been a hardcore sim guy and he's also a very high level football IQ guy. And the more I watch his stuff and, some stuff from other guys, I realize that, even though I've been running sim leagues for the last 5 years and we all think that we know football better than anyone because we're so passionate about it, well, it doesn't make us necessarily right. And I think that's something that we have to be more aware of as a community. And, there's nothing wrong with changing your views and admitting you're wrong in the face of new information. And I think the information's out there. I think there's more people willing to talk about it. But I think, at least from the sim side, they've been so conditioned to think a certain way that it's hard to kind of let go of those assumptions and those misconstrued ideals. So I wanted to touch on a few of those today. There's some things that have come up, and both on things that I've seen other people say, and some things that I've changed along the way, from my own perspective. The first thing I want to touch on is anybody that thinks that the top competitive guys, the guys that you see playing on TV, on the Twitch streams, the hardcore guys, the top 32, 64, anybody that thinks that those guys couldn't play real football because they don't know anything other than cheats and exploits is 100% wrong. They do what they do because they're trying to win. And the game is never going to be perfect, but this year in certain areas, last year in different areas, it has flaws. And anybody is going to use those if they can. Just because they know how to run 20 different plays doesn't mean they're going to. If their opponent doesn't know how to defend the one play they're running, and that might be the one play that everybody has a hard time dealing with, but each person has the equal opportunity to run the same play. So I kind of equate it to a military person, somebody going out into the field. They might have a sniper rifle, they might have an assault rifle, they might have a handgun, they might have a grenade. Each of them is going to be used for a different purpose. And just because they're using their sniper rifle, or just because they choose to use their grenade, doesn't mean that's the only thing they know how to use. It's the only thing that they're using in that particular moment, because that might be the most effective for them to get their job done. And I think competitive guys are a lot of the same. Now, I'm not saying all of them. Obviously we know the Voltarax guy, which everybody pretty much agrees that without the Swerve, he would not be one of the top 32 guys. He wouldn't be in any of these tournaments. He's found a way to use one specific exploit and get himself consistently into the conversation. And, for those of you that say they just will do anything, the Swerve is one thing that almost all of the competitive guys other than him, and there's probably a couple others that might try it here and there, they all pretty much refuse to use it. It's kind of like a gentleman's agreement. Like, if you don't do it to me, I'm not going to do it to you. Not saying that, late in the game, they need something to happen, they're losing money on the line, that they might not go to it, but for the most part, they've stayed away from it unless somebody's doing it to them. And, most of the high-end guys, and you got to give them credit for that. They don't have to. They could all go out and do the Swerve if they wanted to, but they don't because they realize just how big of a glitch it is. And I don't think sim guys give them enough credit for that. I think they tune in and they see what they see they don't like, and then they draw their own assumptions by it. And I'll be honest with you, I don't like what I see. I don't like seeing, some guys, the only thing they can run is, well, not only thing they can run, but online in the tournament aspect, most of what they run is nickel blitz, or most of what they run is a trip set or a bunch set or snugs or whatever. It's a lot of the same stuff over and over again, but that's a lot of the same stuff that the game just doesn't handle very well. And there's a differentiation between those guys at the top level who are doing it because they've figured out that that's hard for their opponent or most of their opponents to adapt to, versus the guy who's not ranked, who's, in the middle of the pack, who doesn't know anything about football and who is only beating you because he knows one thing. There's a difference there. Just because the average online guy may not know much and may only be successful because of a glitch or an exploit doesn't mean the top guys are the same. Those guys, I've seen guys say things over the last few days. I see NY Kia all the time, and he gets beat by these guys all the time. I mean, he was right at the top 100. There's 99 guys that are consistently ahead of him. And Kia blows my mind with the stuff that he knows and how he can break down things. So to say that they don't know football is complete fallacy. It's not accurate. And I think sim guys really have to kind of take a step back and make a distinction between the average guy you're playing online and the elite competitive guys, because there is definitely a distinction. Going along with that, just because a guy that you're playing is running the same thing over and over doesn't mean that's the only thing he can run. Good example, I was playing a MUT game the other day. I have this Vikings team I'm putting together for our MUT league, and I wanted to get a game in, and I was playing this guy, and what do you know? Right out of the box, he starts running nickel 2 blitz at me. And I'm like, here we go. One of these guys, that's all he's got. Well, to my surprise, I started countering it. And I used tips from Kia, and it's basic football strategy. Nothing that I didn't know, but just something that it doesn't come to me as much. And maybe that's because I don't play on high enough level. I'm used to not having to deal with the same thing over and over again. So maybe that kind of stuff isn't as rapid fire in my brain. But I was prepared for it, and I started running bubble screens at him. And after the first bubble screen I completed for a first down, he changed. He switched up what he was doing. Now, he switched up and he was running a lot of drop zone, and he wound up getting ahead of me, and he was a little bit more diverse on offense. But it was still, mostly the same 5 or 6 plays. But he had a better team. My guys weren't stopping it. And honestly, for the most part, he's probably your mostly typical online player, at least from what a lot of guys would say. But he knew how to do more than just one thing. He had multiple tools in his bag. And while he might not have been as diverse as I would have liked him to be, maybe I wasn't good enough at beating those things. And if I spent as much time as a lot of other guys practicing all the different plays and finding out how to beat different things, things might have been different. But, he had a better team, and he wound up beating me by 10, I think is what the final was. But it just was a reminder. And it was something I'd already started to come to grips with before that. But it was really apparent. Like, it registered with me. All right. I showed I could beat his blitz by running the screen at him, and he changed his play callings. He not only changed his play calls, but then he tried to he figured I was going to do the same thing over and over. So I ran one, and I got a first down. He thought I was coming back to it, so he changed his play, and he also played as he was the linebacker or the cornerback over there and tried to manually go over there. He thought he was going to be slick and pick me off. And then he was surprised when I actually changed and I did something different. And so it became a little bit more high level of a football game. And it, by sim standards, no, it wasn't great. He didn't mix it up as much, but he had a better team and he was doing different things. If I adjusted and I showed him I could shut down one thing, he'd go to something else. And at the end of the day, like, that should be your typical experience in Madden. But why I'm putting this in a podcast titled Where Sim Guys Get It Wrong is because that game they would still complain about. They would say, oh, this guy just ran the same 3 or 4 plays over and over again, and he loaded his team up with all 98, 99 players across the board, and, it was just cheese. No, it's not. Just because he took more time to build a better team than me, or spent more money to build a better team than me, or plays the game more than me and knows the different plays and how to adjust to the things that I'm running, doesn't mean he's a cheeser and that he doesn't know what he's doing. We have to adjust that mindset in that just because we can't beat something or because we don't know how to counter it doesn't mean it's cheese. Doesn't mean this guy doesn't know football. That guy might know more football than you do, or more I do. You don't know that. You can't just draw those assumptions based on these limited pieces of information. So that's a big thing that I think we all have to kind of wrap our heads around and say, all right, maybe when this guy comes out, he's running the same thing. Maybe there is a counter to it. Maybe if I do something different to counter it, maybe he'll change and go to something else. And then maybe if I show him I can beat that, he'll change and go to something else. And then now we're playing football again. And that's the idea. And from that perspective, when you take your mind out of that hole and say, all right, well, let me work with what I got here, you can find more fun playing those games. I mean, not saying there not going to be frustrations. Even if I was a little bit better at the game, he still had a significant advantage over me over how good his team was. Well, I haven't really been playing much for the last couple months, so he's had more time to build up his team. The easy thing is to say, wow, this guy goes and spends all his money and he's got... You don't know that. I don't know that. He might have, but he might have sat there and just grinded and completed all these missions and got all these players to that. You have no idea. I think a lot of the times we make excuses for ourselves and we blame the other guy instead of looking at ourselves and saying, what do we got to do to get better? What is my hole in my game that's allowing this to happen? And then when you try multiple different things and you're putting time into practice and you're finding something like, all right, I've tried everything realistically that I can think that should count for this, and it's not, all right, then we might have a problem. That's something that we might need to bring to the devs. But just because somebody's running the same play over and over again doesn't mean you can't beat it. It doesn't mean that's the only option that they have available to them. I think another thing that sim guys get wrong is assuming that all casuals, all competitive, all online, whatever, are all the same, in that they all want the same thing. I've seen guys say, if they want the swerve, then let that happen in their modes, but take it out of our mode. Well, most competitive guys don't want the swerve. And I would say probably most online guys don't want the swerve. Some guys just do it because it's easy and they're trying to get wins and they're not good enough to do anything else. So I don't think anybody really wants the swerve. I think it just happened, and then it was something that was hard to fix. I think the biggest thing is just lumping them all in together. If you really listen to like the true competitive guys, the guys that are in the top 100 or around the top 100, they all want a more realistic football game. They want the game to feel more realistic. They don't necessarily like being over the hole. I saw a problem the other day post on Twitter about guys holding down the triangle or Y if you're on Xbox and just running around and getting user lurks and thinking that they're great user guys. They're not. And competitive guys recognize this. They know what it takes to be a great user, and they think that most of them think that particular concept is making it too easy for guys that aren't that good to do it. So, to lump them in and say they're all the same, like they all want that, and give that them if they want and take it away, let us sim guys have... No, man, like, it shouldn't be that way. we're all Madden players. We're all in it together. And honestly, we're not as far away as you think. They know a lot about football, especially the top end guys. And it would do a lot of you guys some good. I've been doing it, and I've opened my mind to it. And I think a lot of you guys would benefit the same way. But actually having conversations with these guys and watching some of their videos and seeing what do they know, what can they teach you? Maybe they can teach you some real football concepts that you're not aware of, and that can help you get better just as an overall sim player. I think honestly, a lot of sim guys, just a lot of guys in this community handcuff themselves to quote unquote sim, and it's become a comfort for them in that, well, I can sit in this bubble and I don't have to really know how to play better outside of this bubble because I know if we limit this, that, or the other, that's my comfort zone and I can compete in that comfort zone. But it's not necessarily realistic. I mean, some of the rules that we have in our league aren't necessarily realistic. One, for instance, is, limiting routes or plays, right? Let's just go with plays. Madden Universe, Relly, on Twitter, pointed this out. Some teams might only run 8 to 13 concepts an entire game. Now, he didn't specify whether that was pass or run concepts, but let's just say it's 5 different run concepts and 8 different pass concepts. That's 13 total concepts in 70 plays. They might run each one of those 5 times. Now, they might run them all from different formations, or they might run some of them 2 or 3 times from the same formation. They're not necessarily going out there and running 70 different plays. They're running maybe 13 different concepts in 5 different formations or less. And while we do things like that, like limit the amount of times you can run a certain play to prevent things that might be overpowered, like nickel blitz or forverts in the past, toss plays in the past, stuff like that, it's easier to do that than, tell everybody, hey, submit your 13 concepts that you're going to run to the commissioner, and you can only run those 13 in the game. Nobody really wants to do that, so it's easier to say you can only run a same play from the same formation once a half or once a game, however you set it up. But that's not necessarily realistic. We do it to try to prevent plays that we think are overpowered, but we really don't know what all the plays are overpowered, and we don't really want to say it because we might be wrong, and so we just put this blanket out there, right? And it becomes comfortable, and we all kind of play within that space, but it's not necessarily realistic. We try to get guys to mix up their defenses and, run a variation of defenses, not just sitting the same thing over and over again. Again, it's based around, is one thing more overpowered than the other? And some of it's just variety. I think sometimes guys will get bored if they just, everybody's just running the same 3 or 4 plays in defense or 5 or 6 in offense. I think it gets boring for some guys. I think some guys like the strategy of trying to think about different plays. But if you're just going from a straight realism perspective, not necessarily. Seattle, for instance, runs a lot of cover 3 match type concepts and cover 1. Very high percentage. I don't know that they run a ton of 2 high safety looks. It's a lot of that kind of look, right? But if you did that in the sim league, you'd kind of be looked down upon because you're not mixing it up. Look at the old Tampa 2 defenses. They pretty much sat in some variation of Tampa 2 the whole game. Might have mixed in some cover 4s, some 2-man under, stuff like that, but mostly it was Tampa 2. But if you did that in today's game, you'd be frowned upon because you're limiting what your opponent's offense can do. You're kind of pigeonholing them into doing the same thing over and over again to beat you. Well, that's kind of football. And again, we do a lot of this stuff to limit things that are overpowered, but sometimes I think we get too comfortable in our own perception of what's realistic and what's overpowered, and it makes it easy to sit in that space and say, all right, well, we're just going to do this because to us it's more realistic, when it's not really. It's perfectly acceptable for some guy to run smash against you 5 or 6 times in a game if you're just sitting in a 2 high safety the whole time and you're not changing it. They might run it more. Yeah, there's other options to beat cover 2, but why if you're not adapting to it? You know what I mean? So that's one thing I think we got to look at more in the way we look at things, the way we run our leagues. What rules can we maybe take out? What rules are kind of old? What rules are just mostly a comfort thing? Some leagues might still want to play that. And look, if you want to play that way and you want to say, hey, we want every guy in our league to call 55 different plays every game, that's fine. I mean, everybody's allowed to enjoy the game in a different way, but if you do that, don't come to a competitive guy and say, hey, we know more, you're doing this and we do this and you're wrong and we're right. Because you're not necessarily. That's just the way you choose to play. Just like they choose to play in a way that they're going to do whatever it takes to win because they're trying to play for money. You don't have to necessarily agree with it, but that doesn't make you more right versus them. And I think that's something a lot of guys have to understand. And myself, I want to look at our rules and see, okay, what are some of these things that aren't necessarily realistic? Grafster, give him credit on this one. He pointed this out to me. It makes perfect sense. Hot routes. I've been a big proponent for as long as I've been running leagues. You can only run one hot route per play. And the reason being, in real life, yes, a side adjustment or a quote-unquote hot route is typically the quarterback and the wide receiver, the hot receiver, looking at the defense and saying, okay, we know based on what we're seeing, we need to change our route to this. And that's it. It's just one player. It gets too confusing a lot of times if you got multiple different things. But that's not completely accurate because Grasser pointed out some plays can have tags where there might be a couple of receivers in that same play based on what they see, they adjust their route. And it's not necessarily an option route. It's only if they see this different thing. So it's a more complex play. It's something that Madden doesn't really have in there. And he said, hot routes allow you to make those adjustments. You can call the same play, but if you call something that is maybe designed to beat one defense, but you get a different look than you expected, you don't necessarily want to go to your quick audibles because they're kind of basic, so you call 2 or 3 hot routes to set up a different play that's going to beat the look that you're expecting, which in real life, if they had called a play that had tags and had multiple adjustments in it, they could do that. Option routes is another one. There's some option routes in Madden, but some plays in some offenses, they have a lot of option routes. And so that player's going to change what he does based on that. Well, you can't pick an option route as a hot route, but you might come out and your guy's on a streak and you realize that it looks like they're in cover 4, so you audible into a curl. And, maybe there's trips on one side and maybe you bring a drag underneath of him or you put an out outside of him or you run off somebody else. Like, just because guys are making these adjustments doesn't necessarily mean they aren't based in real football concepts. And so I think it's hard to kind of balance that because we don't have as many options on defense to account for some of these. And I think if you allow people to run multiple hot routes, it can be very difficult for the average user to try to figure out how to adjust for all these. So I hope in Madden 18 we have more options on defense as base defensive calls and easier adjustments that we don't have to run around trying to hot route all these different players to try to account for everything they want to do. So we can play more basic defense, but hot routes, as they are, technically aren't realistic if you're calling more than one, but it can be realistic if you're trying to create combos that aren't in the game or adjustments to a play that aren't in the game, but they're realistic adjustments to beat what you're seeing. And so it doesn't always mean that somebody's trying to cheese you when you're running multiple hot routes. So it's things like that we can look at and say, all right, can we change some things like that? Can we actually be more realistic in this space by looking at things like that? So I think it's important for all of us to kind of take a step back and look at those things and say, what maybe do I not know about football? Is my knowledge of football limited? Can I learn something from somebody else? Can I learn something from a competitive guy? Challenge those ideas. Are they really doing those things because they don't know any better? Or is it just because that's the tool that they need to use to win that particular game? And I think we'll accomplish a lot more. I know a lot of people are, talking about competitive guys don't give us respect. EA doesn't recognize us enough, stuff like that. Honestly, when a large portion of the community is making those assumptions and saying things about competitive players like that, I mean, does that really help or hurt the perception? We're obviously guys that are here and we pay our money, but is it really landing credibility to our movement, so to speak, if we're out there communicating and saying things that don't make sense or aren't accurate or making assumptions about people that we don't really know? Is that going to make the devs more prone to listen to us and say, oh yeah, we need to make the game the way they say because they're out here spilling phony information all over the place? No, it's not. They're going to look at us and be like, all right, Let's not listen to the sim guys because they don't really know what they're talking about. Let's go to the competitive guys because they can break down these plays and they know these. And I'm not saying that no sim guy understands it. There are coaches that like to play sim football and understand high levels. There are guys that are just students of the game, maybe played the game before, or just really like to study it and know the game on a high level. And I'm not talking about those guys. I'm talking about the average sim guy, the majority of the sim guys that are live in this bubble of what they think is realistic and what they think is realism, and that maybe it's not as true to them as they really think. Maybe it's just comfort on their side. Maybe it's fear of getting out and trying something new. Maybe it's just hate of money. Maybe they don't want to spend money and they feel like they're getting talked into. Whatever it is, whatever the reason that's putting you in that comfort zone, try to get out of it a little bit. Maybe play a MUT game, maybe play a ranked game, maybe don't play them because you really don't like them and you don't want to be in that space, but at least listen to these guys and see if you can learn something from them. See if you maybe don't realize some of the things are as realistic as you think they are, and then that can shift. Another thing, I'll point this out real quick before I wrap up. Another thing that I've been a big proponent on, and a lot of other sim guys have, is competitive guys don't want penalties and injuries in games. And I asked the question today. I said, why not? Why FIFA's get penalties and injuries? Why can't Madden guys? And Clint said it was easy. Their system is more advanced in a way that Madden's is more reliant on random dice rolls, and FIFA's is a little bit more advanced and actually based on things that are happening on the field. So it's more realistic, basically. Maybe Frostbite helps Madden get there. Maybe Madden's limited a little bit just because they have more guys running into each other than FIFA does. But it's one of those things I was like, okay, that makes sense, right? I always thought it was just because competitive guys just they want to control over everything. Well, no, they might be okay with injuries and penalties, but right now, the way it's done, they're not, because they know it's just random and it's not physics enough based, player movement enough based. It's not where FIFA's is yet. So hopefully we get there, and hopefully we do see those, but right now, they don't want it, and that makes sense why. It's too much of a random generator. I'm sure some sim guys can argue, well, hey, as long as the random number generator is accurate to what happens in real life, then why not, right? And honestly, I buy that to a degree. I think you could make that case. I've suggested, maybe having them in there, but maybe toning them down in the fourth quarter in the most critical points of the game. But there's a valid reason why they're not, and we have to open up and open ourselves up to that kind of information to allow us to make more informed decisions and more informed assumptions about things versus just kind of making it up on our own. So hope that helped you guys in some way. I hope that maybe creates some discussion in the sim community. I hope that maybe makes some guys rethink their view on what sim really means and whatnot. And we can all grow from it. We can all get better. I still am of the belief that I don't want sim in competitive settings. I want one Madden game that everybody can agree on, that we might have to acquiesce some things, maybe competitive acquiesces some things, and we find a game that we can all love and play. And I think that's the best for everybody. I don't like this segmentation, but it sounds like it's coming, and a lot of guys want that, so we're probably going to go in that direction. But long term, I think it's better if we all can kind of figure out a football game that we're all happy playing, and we can all live in the space and peace and harmony, so to speak. Might be a wishful thinking, but I'm going to hold on to hope for that one day. So hope you guys all have a great remainder of the week. Definitely looking forward to your comments. What do you guys think? Has there been something that's changed for you that maybe opened your eyes and you've changed your perception? Is there something that you can prove to me where I'm wrong? Let me know that. Maybe there's something, you have contrary evidence to what's been presented to me. Try to leave out the opinions, don't tell me I'm wrong just because you want me to be wrong. If you got facts, let's share them. Let's have a good conversation. Let us know in the comments what you think. Excited to hear everybody's opinion. I mean, it's definitely an interesting subject, so definitely open to hear what everybody has to say. Again, hope you guys have a great week, and we will catch you again this weekend. Thank you for listening to another episode of the PX1 Sports Radio Podcast. For more, you can find us on Twitter at PX1 Sports or online at px1sports.com. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.